Welcome, everyone, to the Penny Stamps Distinguished Speaker Series. I know we probably have some folks still coming in from the lobby, but there was, if you noticed as you came in today, that was the International Fair of the Stamp School. The Stamp School is the only unit at the University of Michigan that requires its students to go abroad and have an international engagement as a requirement of graduation. So, yes. Incubating the culturally engaged, that's what we're up to. So today we present someone very dear to the series and beloved in many an Ann Arbor home, I know, illustrator, author, and designer Maira Kalman. Yes, and we're oh so lucky to have her here today. I want to heartily thank our partners for their support of today's presentation, the Institute for the Humanities, Chelsea's River Gallery, and Michigan Radio 91.7 FM. So, landing a date with Maira is no small feat. She's a creative whirlwind, and she maintains a very, very busy travel schedule, you know, around and amongst her creating things, making, and presenting her work. She is so prolific, as a matter of fact. Last spring, I took a trip to New York City, and I found her work in almost every single museum I went to. I loved running into, there was a Ralph Pucci mannequins show at the Museum of Art and Design, and there were mannequins designed by Maira as part of that show. And she also had her own curated show, which many of you may have seen at the Cooper Hewitt last summer, which was wonderful, and she surprised me as showing up as, and she's also a composer. So, her abundant industry is evidenced by the many, many years of courting her it has taken for her to arrive here today. I first approached Maira with a series invitation in 2009. This then resulted in 3 years of correspondence, which then landed her first appearance, which was here back in January of 2012. She was here with Daniel Handler as they presented their project, Why We Broke Up. I'm sure many of you were probably present at that time. And I think that if you were, you will also agree that that event only served to increase the desire to hear her speak unaccompanied and about her own body of work. So now, another 3 years later, or 6 years in total from that initial invitation, we finally have her solo. So I'm very, very pleased. Nicola's Books is in the lobby. They have some books. Perhaps some of you brought some books. Maira is willing to sign books. So in lieu of a Q&A today, we will have Maira convene with those folks who would love to say hello or have a book signed in the lobby directly following the talk. Please do turn off your cell phones. And now, for a proper introduction for any of you not yet in the know, we have a devoted fan from the upper echelons of the fan club, Stamp School professor and sound artist Stephanie Rowden.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much, Christina, for the invitation to introduce this evening. So, I tried to prepare this introduction without repeating the word delicious, but I couldn't figure out my way around it. That's how happy I am to welcome Maira Kalman back to Ann Arbor. Maira is an author, illustrator, designer, a reporter at large on life. In painting, publication, and even performance, she asks the biggest questions. Who are we? Why are we here? Her many accomplishments point to a big-hearted and astonishingly imaginative practice of observing, making, writing, and collaborating. Maira Kalman has written and illustrated almost 20 children's books, including several of my all-time favorites that feature Max Stravinsky, poet, dreamer, dog. She is renowned for her New Yorker covers and illustrated columns. Her monthly online columns for the New York Times have been celebrated and collected as books. The first, The Principles of Uncertainty, was a year-long narrative journal of her life. And The Pursuit of Happiness was a year-long exploration of American history and democracy. There are many major museum and gallery exhibitions which I would be tempted to list here. I'll just talk about a couple. For example, her current project at Julie Saul Gallery in New York City, where she's had a number of solo shows, and a major retrospective of her work that traveled from the Institute of Contemporary Art, Philadelphia, to the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, the Skirball Center in Los Angeles, and the Jewish Museum in New York City. As Christina mentioned, this last year she curated a gorgeous, idiosyncratic exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum with 40 objects from the Cooper Hewitt, the National Museum of American History, and her own personal collection. Hats, shoes, a drinking cup from ancient Greece, a mourning handkerchief, Abraham Lincoln's pocket watch. In her words, the exhibition was about falling in love with a group of objects, the preciousness of time, the potential for a fluttering sense of discovery. That fluttering sense of discovery and potential is what I feel when I encounter Maira Kalman's work in whatever form, like her recent book projects with Daniel Handler, AKA Lemony Snicket, which Christina mentioned. Then there are the operas, set designs for dance performances, and a whole lot more. Even a performance as a dancing duck in Isaac Mizrahi's staging of Peter and the Wolf. At the far end of my studio, there's an old couch that looks like it could be in a Maira Kalman painting. Maybe I just like to think of the couch this way because next to the couch, there's a collection of books that I turn to when I'm stuck and my thinking is getting small. A lot of the books in that stack are by Maira Kalman. I start to pore over those delicious gouache images and the smart, sassy writing, and soon I'm moving across big swaths of time and memory, stopping for tiny observations on walks through cities, into nooks of history, philosophy, and personal memory, with all those quick turns between generous moments of tenderness, sorrow, grief, and delight. A longing wells up in me, a longing to live in that world with magnificent poet dogs, sensational hats, splendid tassels, and even Mrs. Kakelman, where I can see how beautiful and sad and poignant and awkward we are. I want to live there, where I feel braver, more alert to all the stories around me, more charmed by collections of rubber bands and ticket stubs, hairdos, family squabbles, philosophical conundrums, and delicious baked goods. And then I realize I already am in that world. It's all right here. And that's when I get ready to take a walk with my dog and then get back to work. Thank you so much, Maira. Please join me in a warm welcome for Maira Kalman.
It's funny what you have to do when you come to a place. You have to talk and sweep. Actually, it's an important part of my life, which I will be able to tell you more about in a few minutes. So, thank you all for being here on this delicious night. I start every talk that I give with the same image because it's something that I can't not do. So any of you who have seen my talks before will have seen this before, but when I was doing the year-long essays for the New York Times on American democracy, starting with Obama's inauguration, I asked people to draw maps of the United States from memory, to quickly do something and represent your, I'm assuming many of you are from this country, to represent your country. And of course, nobody got it right ever. It's not that easy, but the best map that I got by far was from my mother. And my mother came from Belarus to Palestine, which is now Israel, and then to America. So when I asked her to draw a map, this is what she did. So for those of you who haven't seen this, I mean, even though for those of you who have seen this before, I find it endlessly, I mean, it's, you know, isn't it the best map of the United States you've ever seen? And the more you look at it, the more insane it gets. And so look at where Alaska is, look at where Hawaii is, look at where Texas and California are. And she has Lenin in there, which is the village that she came from in Belarus, which is where I went to visit this summer, to the River Sluch, and got some water. I don't know, I mean, I do know why I got the water, but I'll tell you later. And through the center of the map, she said, sorry, the rest unknown, thank you, which is basically, sorry, the rest unknown, I couldn't care less. And I think that if I had to describe, and I have this map on my wall, I look at it every day, of course, in my studio, and I think that what a tremendous gift it was to grow up with somebody who had such a wonderfully askew, funny, irreverent way of looking at the world, where there was no obligation to do anything right. There was just an obligation to do what you needed to do. And that carried through in a very real way with her. So the work that I did, the important work of daydreaming when I was a child, really informed the rest of my life. And I inhabit that so intensely, I mean, that it's a little bit scary that I'm very much a child, and yet I'm an adult that earns money. So it's an interesting situation. But that free-floating brain ability is something that I use all the time. So when after 9/11, when Rick Meyerowitz and I were talking about what had happened in the attack on New York, the conversation that we started having was, well, what's New York about, and what are all these tribes? And it was so horrific and so complicated. So then we started doing a map that ended up being the cover of the New Yorker a few months after, and we were able to take this really scary time and have a sense of humor about it, which is the way that I respond to everything. That if you don't have a sense of humor about what's going on in your life, then you're really dead. So in this map, we took New York, and we have the Upper East Side. We have Pashmina and Botoxia. I don't know if you can see it. And the Blahniks, the Kooks, the Mullahs are in Wall Street. The Khakis and the Kharkis are in Connecticut. The Easy Pashtun and the Fattushis, which I think was Rick's idea. So that ability to laugh at what was going on was really something critical and able to be part of the work. So basically my day is this. I wake up, which is a good thing. We read the obits, and we say that and I don't like reading the news because I think that's just a spiral of depression. That's like a black hole. So, but I do look at the obits, which I don't think of as a black hole. I think of it as an inspiring moment of, well, get going with the day. And so, and the thing that I do, which is my job, and I gave myself this job description when I was young, is that I will wander around the world and I'll tell you what I see, and that's it. And that's exactly what is happening, with deadlines and things like that. So, I go somewhere and I get to see this chicken, and I think, well, this is the greatest chicken I've ever seen on a plate in my life. And it's a chicken in Florence, and the feather is still in the leg, and and I'm grateful for that feather. And I know that I'm going to paint it and I'm going to use it in my work, but I just don't know when. I see tons of sofas on the street, and if you start looking, you'll notice that there's a tremendous amount of living room furniture that's sprinkled through the land. And so I photograph broken chairs and sofas, and the conversation about broken things and about people that are broken and lives that are broken and things that are broken and how beautiful they can be and how compassionate you need to be to both the things and the people is an interesting conversation. And then I follow people, and they're not often they're usually okay with that, but some of them are not. This guy kept running. This was in a park in Moscow, and he kept running away from me. Is he up there? And I kept running after him, and I thought, clearly, this is like the worst thing that's happened to him today. But I fell in love with him, and I wanted to be able to say to him, I really love how you are. There's something about your persona. So anyway, I photographed him, and I painted him a zillion times. You're going to see him tonight. This is just one of the drawings that I did, and I paired him for a project that I did for the School of Visual Arts with the only reason for time is so that everything does not happen at once. That's an Einstein quote. And the ability to put my imagination into my actual assignments is an interesting way of looking at things, because I was doing a piece about Lincoln for the Rosenbeck Library, which became part of the year for the New York, for the American history for the New York Times, and then became a children's book. So the conversation became something that was for both adults and children. So when I was working on Lincoln, I went to the Rosenbach Library and I looked at all their archives and I was taking really serious notes and I fell madly in love with him. And the best doodle that I made while I was at the library became the most favorite thing that I've done about American history, which is this invitation that I wrote. So Mrs. Myra Lincoln requests the pleasure of your company at the Sunday social, RSVP, punch, and dainties. I was sure that she would have dainties, or not she, because it's me, I would have dainties. And the idea that I would be his wife was so real and so true, and we were so loving. We'd be such a loving, loving couple. And you know, there is a lot of question about whether Mary Todd Lincoln was crazy, whether they loved each other. You know, I think they did in their fashion. But anyway, here I am imposing myself in this history, which is complicated because we have a time glitch. You know, so to fall in love with, I mean, I defy anybody not to fall in love with Abraham Lincoln, but I don't know how many of you would actually imagine being married to him. But I didn't. What I said about also doing other people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they had absolutely no appeal for me at all. I thought Jefferson was stern and I wouldn't date him. But Lincoln, absolutely, absolutely. So the Principles of Uncertainty was the beginning of the conversation with the New York Times about what is it that was interesting to me. And what was interesting was the unknown, was the serendipity of what happens to you when you wake up in the morning and you have to go out and discover the world each day anew, which I think is an incredible thing to do. So I wrote a piece about February, which was, you know, a dire month, probably not so great here also, and talked about how a package arrives in the mail, and the package is covered with a newspaper. The newspaper has a photo of a man who's lying dead in the snow, and I say, I hope he's not really dead, just enjoying a refreshing lie down in the snow. But the caption says he is dead, so I have to believe that. And then it turns out that the man in the photo is Robert Walser, who was a fantastic writer in the turn of the last century in Switzerland, and ended up in a mental institution, and then was allowed to go on walks because his madness was a benign one for other people. And so he went for walks, and then one day he fell down in the snow or lay down in the snow, and he died. And then a photographer came by and took this photo of these two men standing behind, casually looking at this man with his hat flung away from his head. And so since then, I didn't know about who he was, but since then I've done a lot of work about Robert Walser and the idea of the fragility, of course, of life and how vulnerable we all are, how you have absolutely no idea what's going to happen, not only tomorrow, but in the next minute. And it's a conundrum. You know, how do we handle that? I don't have any idea how we do that, except for me, what I do is I work. But I ruminate about, you know, telling the truth and lying. And another thing my mother always said is that if everybody said what they were thinking, nobody would be speaking to anybody. And if you think about that for a minute, that's a kind of bleak approach to the world, because she's saying that nobody tells the truth, and the truth is always, the truth is not pleasant. So I don't know. I mean, I can't see your hands, a show of hands of who agrees with that. That would be interesting. But at any rate, her life was a complicated one. She had a marriage that was not really that happy, and yet my parents had a lot of parties, and we grew up in Riverdale. After we left Israel, we grew up in Riverdale in the Bronx, and they served mocha cream cakes from Mother's Bakery in Riverdale, which is still there in case any of you go to Riverdale in the Bronx. So when the Principles of Uncertainty had an event at the New York Public Library, and Nico Muhly, the fantastic composer Nico Muhly, wrote a series of songs based on my writing for the Principles of Uncertainty, after everything was over, the guests came out into the hall, the great hall of the library, and there were 30 mocha cream cakes from Mother's Bakery, which I had wanted to bake, but that would be insane. But they were served from there. And for me, the intersection of great melancholy and sorrow, and then courage and determination, I mean, it's something that happens. It happens so much that it's, as I said earlier, it's extraordinary that we're actually functioning. So, but here we are. And not to be too sad. So I have a happy story about Toscanini's pants. Well, I won't tell you. I'll just start this story. So my mother comes from Belarus, from a little village there, and this is the family. In 1932-33, they came on the SS Polonia to Palestine, to Tel Aviv. where Tel Aviv is an extraordinary city of great modernism. So there's this, it was interesting, the old country from these teeny villages where there was nothing to this sense of the future with fantastic modernism and hope and, you know, the white city. So at the same time, in 1932-33, Bronislaw Huberman, the Polish violinist, was realizing that the future for Jews in Europe was grim, and decided that he was going to form an orchestra in Palestine, and convinced hundreds and hundreds of Jewish musicians and their families to come there. And he invited Arturo Toscanini, the great conductor, to conduct the first performance, because at that time, Toscanini was really protesting and becoming an anti-fascist, and he was getting into trouble with Mussolini, and he was not going to perform for Hitler. So he was taking a tremendous stand, and even though he wasn't Jewish, and even though he was a great celebrity, he was still, his situation was in jeopardy. And he said, so Huberman invited him to conduct the first performance, and he said yes. And he came to Tel Aviv, and there he is on the boardwalk with Huberman, and it really sent a signal to the entire world to, you know, that there were people who would stand up to the fascists and to the Nazis. The performance was a tremendous success, and of course the whole world was watching. And it was, and I like to think that at the same time when if Toscanini had bumped into my mother in Tel Aviv, he would have fallen madly in love with her, and my name would be Maira Toscanini today, as opposed to Myra Lincoln, which is so clearly there's a delusional aspect to things. So we came to America in 1954, and here we are with our beloved possession. And you know, we had unlimited TV. We didn't know it was bad to watch. My parents didn't know it was bad. So they just put us in front of the TV, and 4 years later came and, you know, took us out for dinner. So it was, I thought it was the greatest thing that had ever happened. That and Coca-Cola, I thought, now this is truly the greatest land on earth. And I say, if you want to come to the United States, come in 1954. So we're in the Bronx. Toscanini comes and moves with his family to the Bronx, to Riverdale, which is where we were. And here he is with his wife and his grandson, Walfredo. And they moved into this place. We didn't move exactly into this kind of mansion. So the years go by. I go to the High School of Music and Art for Music. I study piano and voice in high school. And we used to say, meet you at the Toscanini between the two elevators if you wanted to meet somebody to go out and you know, smoke a cigarette or something. So meet you at the Toscanini. So a few years ago, we were reading the newspaper, and after having finished the obits, Rick says to me, well, you know, Toscanini's pants are up for auction. And I thought, now that's an incredible thing. So of course I ran out the door right away. And I decided that one of the things that I had to have in my life were Toscanini's pants. The same pants that he wore to conduct the Israel Philharmonic in 1937. So I went up there, and I thought, you know, I don't deserve to have these pants, but yet I really do deserve to have these pants. But maybe other institutions like the Metropolitan Opera or the Carnegie Hall, they might have some thoughts about owning it. But in fact, I won them. So I thought, and that's really, I know, isn't it amazing? And I put them in the show at the Cooper Hewitt because, so I call them my anti-fascist pants. Horowitz, Vladimir Horowitz, the greatest pianist of the 20th century, was Toscanini's son-in-law. He was married to, you know, Toscanini's daughter Wanda. So I imagine that Horowitz certainly touched Toscanini's pants. I mean, he must, and maybe even sat on his lap every once in a while. I just imagine that there was, I don't know. I kind of think that's a nice thought. That Vladimir Horowitz sat on Toscanini's pants, and now I own Toscanini's pants, and I wear them. So. It's cozy. It's really nice. One of the projects that I love the most that I've done is the Elements of Style, and because it came about in such a natural, organic way. I was at a yard sale on the Cape, and I saw this book, and I started reading it, and I thought, and having been a literature major in college, but barely going to school, I never even heard of it, let alone used it. So. It was an interesting situation to come upon it, and then call, you know, my agent Charlotte Sheedy and say, this is a really great book and people should know about it, and I'm going to illustrate it. So the white estate had to agree, and it was an interesting experience to explain to people how, well, it's so obvious, I'm just going to do paintings of all of the examples. And it's so cinematic and funny and irreverent and crazy that you have to fall in love with this book. And I truly didn't understand half the rules. I mean, you know, rules are something that I just kind of start to get very nervous and my forehead gets damp. So, but I understood that the paintings would be wonderful to do for this. He noticed a large stain in the middle of the rug. And things like Polly loves cake more than she loves me, or it was a unique egg beater, are such extraordinary sentences, and every single sentence in this book is like that. None of us is perfect, and there's my Russian man again, and various characters that I've seen on the street. And the back page, the contents page, is also fractured. Peter Buchanan Smith, the designer, and I did this to say that there are no rules that can't be, that there really no form, and what you expect to have happen doesn't have to happen, and you don't have to be bored with any part of a book, because a book is such a treasured object. So, it's really extraordinary to be able to play around with the copyright page, which is illegible completely, and it probably drives people crazy, but it doesn't matter. So, clearly, my mother is an important part of my life and a great inspiration. And here she is on our terrace in Rome. She only wore white for the last maybe 30 years of her life, and had a closet that was meticulously organized in a way that I can't imagine that most people wouldn't have it like that, but ironed and starched and folded to military precision. So when she died 11 years ago, I decided that her closet should be a museum, and that my sister could sit in the living room and people could come and show up, and they could pay her $1 and see my mother's majestic bras and such. And my sister said no, which I think is crazy, but she perhaps thought I was crazy. So we let the subject drop, but we kept all of my mother's things. And then last year, my son, Alex Kalman, has a museum on Cortlandt Alley in New York called Museum, 2 M's in the front and 2 M's in the back, and it's the smallest museum in the world, they think. It's in in a defunct elevator shaft. And down the alley in New York, there aren't that many alleys left in New York, and down the alley there was a teeny little niche, and we decided that would be the perfect place to install this closet. And so after many months of planning and sweeping, so clearly sweeping is an important part of my life, and cleaning, and I volunteered to sweep in Central Park, but anyway, that's another story. But so we decided that we would install this as if it was a diorama or a vitrine in the Museum of Natural History. And in it are all of her objects, the majestic bras and underpants and socks and shoes and shirts, and all of the objects in this museum, when you look at it, when you're walking down this grungy alley and you see this incredibly pristine, organized space, you can really stand there for a long time. It's a meditation. It's a meditation on order and on creating order and finding beauty and knowing what you have and knowing where you're going, as opposed to chaos and having too much. She really edited her life down to very few objects, which is something that's a whole other conversation too. But that sense that there's a place for everything and everything in its place and it's all beautifully taken care of was something that really resonated. So now the Sara Berman Closet Museum, which is open on weekends in case any of you are happening to come to New York in the next month or so, we'll travel to museums around the world because curators are coming to see it and saying that it's a trajectory of history and it's memory, and it's also a beautiful conceptual piece of art. So the Sara Berman Closet will appear in the next few years in a bunch of museums. I'm not going to say it's going to the Louvre, but you never know. You never know. I got Toscanini's pants, didn't I? So. And as we spoke about earlier, I curated a show for the Cooper Hewitt, also talking about my favorite things from their collection and favorite things that I collect. And the conversation about collection always enters into my mind from memory and architecture and how you felt when you were a child. This is a painting of my father falling out of off the terrace of our apartment in Tel Aviv, which is not exactly a nice memory, but nothing happened to him. He didn't get hurt. He just bounced. And so, I connect that to Joseph Boy's gray suit and how he fell out of the sky being shot down, and the sense of what are these things in our lives that resonate, that they're clearly, if I asked you to draw the first room you remember, the first memory of an architectural space, whatever that is, it would have tremendous poignancy because those are the things that frame you, how you feel in space. I can't think of anything more important except for music. So some of the objects that I chose were a peevish face of a Coptic person from 5th century, and you think this was captured for the camera for posterity. Somebody embroidered this cranky, sour expression, over 1,500 years ago, and I think it's so fantastic that they weren't smiling like idiots for the camera then. And of course, there are images of beautiful hats, which I love. Fashion is always very interesting to me, both fashion and unfashion. And the photograph, and how children interact with imagination and fashion. This is from a photograph by Lewis Carroll. And I also work, I work, a good amount from photographs. And this is, the one on the left is Cartier-Bresson, the one on the right is Dan Arbus. And so as I walk around and sketch and photograph and collect images, my images, other people's images, and use them in various ways to tell the story of really how I'm feeling and how we're all feeling. And one of the quotes that I put in the show was Charles Darwin, but I'm very poorly today and very stupid and hate everybody and everything. One lives only to make blunders. I say that 1,000 times a day. That's not his quote, that's mine. I'm going to write a little book for Murray on orchids, and today I hate them worse than everything. So it's a fantastic, and there, so farewell, and in a sweet frame of mind, I am Charles Darwin. And so one lives only to make blunders is something that you can say, well, how do we, what do we do with that information? Well, what we do is that we walk around the world and we look at sinks. And so now I'm doing a column for Lena Dunham and Jenny Connor, Lena Dunham of Girls and Jenny Connor, her producing partner, have a newsletter now called Lenny. And it's just an online newsletter. And I'm doing a column called Looking Forward, and it's about walking around the world and falling in love with things, from a rubber band to a sink in a great hall, in a great house in England, to a portrait by Goya, to Winston Churchill's Pink Dahlias, and that there's no end to that. There can never be an end to how incredible all of that is. Which brings me to Beloved Dog, which is an incredible subject. So when I was looking at the work that I had done and wanted to work on another book, clearly dogs play an important part in my life, and my dog, Pete, was an important part of my story. So there are trees, glorious and consoling, changing with the seasons, reminders that all things change and change again. There are flowers, birds, babies, buildings. I love all of these. But above all, I am besotted by dogs. And then I talk about how, before I had a dog, I was terrified of all dogs, big and small. Everyone knew they were not to be trusted, and that if you turned your head away for one instant, a dog would lunge at your throat and rip your head off. At least that was what my mother taught me. And what's interesting about that is that a little bit of me still thinks it's true, that every dog I think, this is like the cutest dog in the world, and I think, but be careful because you never know. So. But I don't often admit that publicly. So you reading this book most likely have or had a dog. You certainly know that your dog is or was the dearest, funniest, lovingest, loyalist friend you ever had. And then I talk about the different dogs that I've met. This is Krupnik, a dog who lives in a bookstore in Tel Aviv. And Krupnik has tremendous disdain for, I guess, for everybody. But there's a good reason. She's read all the books in the store and she knows everything. So that I say she, like Montaigne, likes herself, and that is quite enough. So this book is a compendium of and tribute to the many dogs I have encountered over the years, in life and in books. They are constant reminders that life reveals the best of itself when we live fully in the moment and extend our unconditional love. And it is very true that the most tender, uncomplicated, most generous part of our being blossoms without any effort when it comes to the love of a dog. During our years together, I often asked Pete to say one word to me, just one word. It is like asking to hear one word from a loved one who has died. Give me a sign you have not really left me. It is not going to happen, but it does not stop you from wishing and hoping for a miracle. So I would beg Pete to say one word. He never did, but of course he spoke volumes. And I still think that if he had lived longer, I would have gotten one word out of him, but maybe that's not true. So we're coming back to Lincoln. I'm going to end with Lincoln. He also had a dog named Fido, and Lincoln had a tremendous sense of humor, which is one of the reasons that I love him. And because I was so crazy about Lincoln when I did the project for the Cooper Hewitt, I wanted to bring Lincoln's hat into the exhibit as one of the most iconic objects of American history, and something that you could relate to in a very tender way. It's history and it's politics and it's, you know, it's all of that, and it's memory. But it was too fragile to travel, so the wonderful curator, Harry Rubenstein, said, why don't you borrow something else? So what I chose was Abraham Lincoln's pocket watch. Now, he had 4 of them. They don't know which one he had with him when he was shot. So it's 25% chance that this is one that he had with him, but we don't know. So it was given to the museum. It's been in the museum's collection for 150, it's been 150 years, obviously. It hasn't ticked or it hadn't worked since then. And Harry said that if I was interested, there was a possibility that they could have it cleaned and make it tick. And I said, wouldn't it be extraordinary if we could take the ticking of the clock and give it to Nico Muhly and create a song for the show, for the Cooper Hewitt, that would play in the room. So the watch was taken to George. The watch is a national treasure, by the way, and has never left Washington. But it did come to the show in New York with many guards and a lot of security. And so the watch was repaired by George Thomas. It took a whole day, and he was able to clean the whale oil out of it and make it tick for about 10 minutes. It was recorded by the Smithsonian Channel. The recording was given to Nico. Nico wrote music that I wrote the text for, the lyrics for, and it was a song that played every 8 minutes in the room. And what you're going to hear is the actual, historical sound of Abraham Lincoln's watch ticking, what he heard when he opened it in the morning, and then you're going to hear the song. Thank you very much.